75 tons of gold has passed through Russia into Switzerland since the beginning of the war in Ukraine. As of writing this, it's worth $5.5 billion on the open market. And while Russia is sanctioned by EU countries and Switzerland even banned Russian gold in 2022, Russian gold continues to flow into Switzerland completely legally. So how is that possible? Why is Switzerland not stopping this? Well, when you dig into the facts, it turns out this goes way further back than you could even imagine. See, Switzerland's neutrality can be controversial at times, and some may say the country has not always been a champion of ethical behavior, as Switzerland may not be as innocent as you think. Take a look at these paintings for an example. This painting is called The Bathur and Rocks by Paul Cézanne, and this is The Sultan by Edouard Manet. This third one is known as Improvisation No. 10 by Vasily Kandinsky. What do these have in common? Well, all three were found quite recently in Switzerland. In fact, they were looted by wartime Germany affiliated art dealers at the start of World War II and hidden in the country. Starting in 1937, German forces began to collect artwork from communities they persecuted, under the pretense that they represented degenerative art, then hiding them safely behind Swiss borders. The plan was to eventually organize a massive public auction in Switzerland at the end of the war. Despite these shady happenings, you probably know that Switzerland and World War II era Germany were not allied in any way. After all, Switzerland has famously been neutral for centuries. The Swiss even made plans to defend themselves from a German invasion, and at one point they preemptively downed 11 German aircraft hovering over their border. During the conflict, they also maintained diplomatic and commercial relations with the Allies. On paper, Switzerland's reputation for neutrality is indisputable. In fact, they haven't entered a single international conflict since 1815, and radical neutrality has been their official policy since 1907. The Swiss are not part of NATO or any other military alliance, are not a member of the EU, and only joined the United Nations in 2002, making them the last country in the world to join until South Sudan became its own country in 2011. Even now, after Switzerland joined in Western sanctions against Russia for invading Ukraine, the official Swiss government website swears that neutrality has not been broken, stating Switzerland's adoption of the EU sanctions does not alter its neutrality in any way. It does not favor any warring party militarily. See, Switzerland prides itself on being one of the most neutral countries in the world, and being a safe haven for peace. Switzerland cannot, by law, sell weapons to countries in ongoing conflicts or allow foreign militaries the right to use Swiss soil or airspace. The Swiss parliament recently voted a resolution preventing the country from imposing international sanctions on its own or even joining sanctions imposed by other countries. That means it can only bandwagon sanctions negotiated by international organizations such as the UN or the EU. But while Switzerland claims its neutrality is at the service of peace and prosperity and inspired by humanitarian and pacifist ideals, they may not always be as innocent as you might think. If you look closely at the facts, cracks start to appear which reveal another truth. Neutrality always comes at a price. Before the war in Ukraine, Swiss gold imports averaged 20 tons per year. In 2023, that shot up to 38 tons. So what explains that massive spike? An investigation by Swiss public broadcaster SRF and newspaper WOZ revealed how the country continues to import gold coming from Russia. It's more complicated than Switzerland simply importing Russian gold under the table though, as it turns out that the UK is complicit in the scheme too. You see, before 2019, Russia lifted taxes on gold transactions to encourage massive exports toward the UK. We now know that this was in preparation for a war, to finance future military expenses and replenish their central bank's foreign currency reserves in anticipation of international sanctions. Today, Switzerland is absorbing this gold, buying it completely legally and sending it to Swiss refineries to remelt it. But why remelt it, you may ask? Well, remelted gold bars lose their seals of traceability and are restamped with Swiss seals. By doing so, immense amounts of ethically problematic gold are effectively laundered. Yet, gold bars aren't the only way the country is profiting from Russia's current situation. Despite Switzerland's public measures to seize the assets of oligarchs, many seem to find ways to sneak in and hide their belongings from the EU's more restrictive sanctions. Russian billionaires like Viktor Vekselberg, Andrei Malichenko, Roman Abramovich, Dmitry Pimpiansky, and even Putin's alleged lover Alina Kabeva have been living in Switzerland and have set up their businesses over the years. It might shock you to learn that the Russian oligarchs targeted by Western sanctions are living comfortably in Switzerland thanks to so-called Swiss golden visas. So, how is this possible? Well, Switzerland is one of those countries where you can obtain residency or even citizenship by living and working in the country or by investment. All any non-EU citizen with a clean criminal record needs to do is pay a lump tax ranging from 200 to 600,000 Swiss francs, equal to around $230 to $690,000 to gain citizenship, and prove they don't need to work to stay financially afloat. Of course, this is hardly an option for the average Joe, but it's a very easy legal gateway for Russian oligarchs to sneak into the West while enjoying the full protection of Swiss law. The result is that Switzerland hosts at least 85 Russian billionaires through the Golden Visa programs, and while other European countries have offered golden visas, the Swiss government appears to lag behind when it comes to restricting the program, at least for Russian citizens. The main reason is that immigration policies are not controlled by the central government in Switzerland. Instead, each of the 26 Swiss cantons has a different immigration policy in place, only sharing broad guidelines on a national level. And the reason the central government can't step in and expel all oligarchs is that the Swiss constitution guarantees the independence of each canton. So it's illegal for them to do so. All in all, of the 150 billion Swiss francs circulating into the Swiss banking system from Russian assets before the war, it is estimated that 46 billion Swiss francs still remain in circulation. This figure includes all the assets held by Russian people in real estate or industrial activities and stock investments. So, while Ukrainian cities are showered in Russian bombs, Switzerland harbors Russia's ruling class and may legally profit from Putin's pre-war gold sale. But this brings the question, are they really doing anything wrong? At least from their perspective. After all, they are a neutral country. They don't get involved in other countries' business. From a Swiss perspective, there is nothing wrong with making the best of a conflict where you're not a participant. And in this spirit, there's a historical precedent to trading with both sides of a conflict without getting involved. During World War II, Switzerland became richer while the rest of the continent experienced massive destruction and suffering. As a neutral country, the Swiss soon found themselves surrounded by Axis powers like wartime Italy and Germany and occupied France. As the war continued, Switzerland slowly increased trading with the Axis. Exports to Germany, especially of raw materials, electric energy, machinery, and vehicles, skyrocketed at the height of the war, reaching a grand total of 1.1 billion Swiss francs in 1942. At the same time, Switzerland continued to maintain good relations with the Allies, sitting on the fence of this massive conflict. Some might say Switzerland was cornered by the Axis and merely chose between collaboration and invasion, which is probably true, but it's also no secret that the Swiss economy profited from this thorny situation and its government's ability to maintain ambiguity. Throughout the war, the Swiss National Bank bought tons of gold from wartime Germany, effectively pumping funds into the German war machine. In today's money, it is estimated that Switzerland bought $1.7 billion of German gold, which, if you recall, is less than a third of the value of gold indirectly acquired from Russia today. This helped replenish German gold reserves and allowed the Swiss franc to become the only freely exchangeable major currency throughout the war. In turn, the Swiss currency and the collaboration of Swiss financial institutions may have allowed big companies on the Allies' side to bypass sanctions on the Axis, allowing further trade relations with Germany and Italy. As you dig deeper into the conduct of Swiss banks, you find extensive use of the country's infamous banking secrecy laws, which were strengthened in the 1930s and only abolished in 2014. Much of the gold acquired from the German bad guys and the cash flowing into Swiss banks were later found to come from conquered territories, wealth confiscated from families, or even the coins and jewelry taken from concentration camp victims. Claiming the unprovability of the gold's origin, Swiss banks refused to return the majority of the gold to the Allies after the war, only ceding 12% of the total accumulated wealth in the 1946 Washington Agreement. What's different today is that the Swiss are not continuing to buy gold from Russia, they are merely purchasing pre-war Russian gold from the UK. One might say that it was English money that effectively financed the war in Ukraine, while Switzerland is just profiting from it by repaying the UK. On the other hand, the thought of a nation thriving off other countries' troubles understandably makes some heads shake. While the controversial role that Swiss institutions played in World War II is much debated, Switzerland's prized neutrality has had a few notable and problematic exceptions over the years. In 2005, researchers discovered that despite officially condemning the racist apartheid regime from 1963 to 1968, trade between Swiss and South African companies continued until the end of the Cold War. But it gets much worse than that. Starting in the 70s, the Swiss effectively exported highly sensitive technology to the apartheid regime that actively supported the construction of its 6 nuclear bombs, in deals officially struck by private companies but actually backed by the Swiss secret services. Today, secret missions hiding behind the unsuspecting mask of Swiss companies appear to still be active tactics of the Swiss intelligence service. In 2018, Crypto AG, a communications encryption firm located in the heart of Switzerland, appeared to have sold coding equipment to countries including Iran, India and Pakistan, with modifications to allow the CIA and German secret services to break the encrypted communications of these target states. But one of the most controversial parts of Swiss neutrality is weapon exports. Thanks to a single rule, Switzerland can make their neutral diplomatic stance suddenly more flexible. You see, according to the Swiss neutrality policy, Switzerland is allowed to sell arms and military vehicles to any country provided the country is not involved in any open conflicts. This also includes a prohibition on selling weapons to countries that intend to re-export them to warring states. For instance, while Switzerland has officially endorsed virtually all the sanctions imposed by the West on Russia for the invasion of Ukraine, the Swiss government refuses to send weapons to Ukraine directly or even sell weapons to any country intending to later send them to Ukraine. Despite this formal rigidity, in practice the Swiss are quite capable of finding ways to deliver weapons wherever they want to. While the Swiss parliament vetoed a proposed exception to the neutrality policy last year that would have allowed Germany to re-export Swiss ammunitions and battle tanks to Ukraine, the government easily got around this by selling 25 Leopard tanks to Germany to officially substitute those previously sent to Ukraine. This fact shows once more how Switzerland can cherry-pick the application of its neutrality policy, which some people might see as problematic. Just recently, in 2015, Switzerland effectively sold spare parts of air defense systems, fighter jets and battle tanks to Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Bahrain and the UAE. That is despite the fact that they were all involved in the war in Yemen, a conflict that, at the time, had been going on for 4 years already with no sign of relief. While technically not active weapons, these sales could still count as effective support to an ongoing international conflict. In the same way, in 2003, Switzerland allowed US military forces to enter Swiss aerospace, officially for humanitarian and medical flights, but also, it seems, to facilitate surveillance missions over Iraq in preparation for the upcoming invasion of the country. All in all, this covert activity means good business. To put things into perspective, in 2020, Swiss companies exported around $965 million worth of military goods, making Switzerland the 7th largest exporter of weapons in the world. This means that Switzerland made up 0.7% of all international military trade, which is quite impressive for a country of just 9 million inhabitants, once you consider that the first 5 exporters represent 62% of the total. Not to mention the fact that the Swiss have refused to fight any war themselves for over 200 years. All things considered, Switzerland is pretty unique in its ability to build such a distinctive diplomatic character and uphold its neutrality throughout all the wars of the modern era. This has guaranteed peace and prosperity for the Swiss, and indeed allowed the country to become a safe haven for war refugees around Europe and quite often an effective international arbiter to foster world peace. But neutrality comes at a price that can sometimes be ethically controversial. So what do you think of all this? Leave a comment down below. But that's it for this video, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.